Welcome to the Well Path podcast, where we sit down with experts and entrepreneurs across fitness, nutrition, mindfulness, and spirituality, offering you an inside peek at building a business and a life that is truly aligned. I'm your host, Brooke Robbins. Let's get into it. Dylan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Brooke.
I'm so excited to have you. There's a lot to get into. You are a 3-time entrepreneur so far, and I want to get into your work at the different labs. But before we get into that, since you have had sort of like an entrepreneurial journey, I'd love to just kind of take it back to the beginning. What kind of got you started in entrepreneurship? What were your first couple of businesses and how did you get into it?
It might be ironic given the theme that we'll talk about, health and wellness, but my first business was actually selling lollipops in high school.
Okay.
It's quite complicated. We had to cease operations due to some federal legislation that wanted to make school lunch healthier. So lollipops went under the table.
Are you kidding?
I'm going to admit in front of all of your listeners that we continued to sell those lollipops.
Oh my gosh.
We had a nice little underground operation.
Market.
We were black market lollipop dealing.
Okay.
But that I think was actually my first foray into entrepreneurship.
Wow.
Did a little bit around the college consulting, started a business there called Students for Students. Fun, paid for the college going out tabs.
Like helping other people get into college?
Yes, exactly.
Nice.
So we built a small platform to help high school students meet college students at the schools they wanted to go to. The basic thesis being who better to help you through that process than the student who has very recently gotten in and is now actually attending that school.
Right.
But that just exposed me to the basics of what is marketing? What does a customer discovery process look like? What does customer success look like? How do you actually deliver value that you promise somebody? And it also showed me what it's like to make money, which is very attractive, especially at a young age when you have none of that. And that was, I think, my first real foray into business. But after that, really, I caught the bug and never looked back.
Okay.
We started a few businesses later on in college and after graduating. But it was a fun journey. One of these, as you well know, as entrepreneurs. But I think the common thread throughout was self-discovery, self-exploration, and the growth that comes with that.
Yeah.
Which is how I view entrepreneurship. It's a vehicle to learn more about myself, to explore curiosities, and build something of value in the process.
I love that. And what was sort of the bridge between, so actually walk us through in kind of brief terms what your first business or businesses were, which I think were sort of in a similar space. And then at some point you kind of transitioned into longevity health. So walk us through what that looked like.
Yeah. So my first real business, I'll say in air quotes, began when I was a first year at Duke. And that was called NextGen Summit. We were bringing young people together around something to do with entrepreneurship. And at that point in my life, that really meant a non-traditional career path. No offense to some of my best friends at Duke and mutual friends of ours who have gone into some of the more tried and true paths, consulting, finance. I just knew that I wanted to do something slightly different. Again, not at all a knock on those paths. They are very much so there for a reason.
Yeah.
But I wanted to meet others who were pursuing their passions in a way that was perhaps more central to work. And that looked like athletes. It looked like creators. It looked like entrepreneurs by the maybe dictionary definition of people starting businesses.
Yeah.
And we sought out, my partner and I, to find a community of people like that. And we struck out. Every room we went into, we were by far and away the youngest people in that conference or at that table. And we said, let's go build it ourselves. We called it NextGen Summit, took all the money we had at that point, which was basically bar mitzvah money plus some college consulting. And we hosted an event in Austin, Texas in 2015. Probably the worst event of all time, production-wise, truly awful. But the people we got there were just incredible. And that seeded what became a community. Fast forward a few years and we were doing a few million in revenue, extremely profitable, which is very nice to run a profitable real business.
Yes.
We had a team. I actually ended up graduating a little bit early from university just to get after that business opportunity. Felt a little awkward going to math class when we had a few full-time employees who were also helping to, support their own livelihoods. But it was just a blast. And again, classic entrepreneurial story of we tried, we failed, we did something different and it worked. And then we failed again and repeat the process.
Yeah.
That was great until 2020 came around and you can no longer host events. So we went from hosting, I think, about 10,000 people in 2019 across dozens of events around the world. We had chapters that were putting on small workshops, conferences. We had here in New York, 1,000 people at NextGen Summit. And then we went to zero effectively. It was really hard. It was probably the lowest point in our entrepreneurial journey, especially up to that point.
Yeah.
And I think what it forced us to was get back to the mission around why we started this in the first place. And as I shared, it was for me about my career exploration, right? I thought entrepreneurship could be something worth exploring. And we wanted to help others to also have that opportunity. And we saw an opportunity ourselves to do that digitally. And that was what led to NextGen Skills, a company we launched in 2021 and really put out into the world in 2022, the following year, all around helping young people build what we called skills that matter. Now, little branding thing, it's the same entrepreneurial skills that you might have to work on communication to be a founder. You have to be a good communicator to be an employee. So no matter who you are, we were helping you build the soft skills, if you will, and human skills, durable skills, other terms that we like, a little bit better than soft skills.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. And we made it fun and engaging, Duolingo-like for career skills. And that led to the job for me, another product that we ended up building and scaling and using AI to automate a lot of the recruiting process. And happy to go into that further. But that grew from 0 to 100,000 users within the first year, first 9 months.
Wow.
It was crazy watching that take off. And again, the product of a lot of failure up to that point. Right? Had we started that first and had that insight around recruiting, I don't think we succeed, but we had failed a bunch before that. So
that's so interesting. Were the users that came in for that, was there overlap with the NextGen HQ kind of community and audience that you guys had built?
In theory, there should have been. It's actually funny to think about how that began, but the core insight after a couple of years working with thousands of students on our upskilling app on NextGen Skills, we were constantly getting the question around, okay, great, I learned these skills, but can you help me apply them? Like I learned leadership, I learned communication, and yeah, I believe you that this will help me in my career, but could you actually get me the job around that?
Yeah.
And that's a pretty obvious one in hindsight. But at the time, we were like, no, learning, not recruiting. So we decided to test what that would look like. And we built a low-code, very simple platform, simple intuitively, but some complex AI in the background.
Okay.
And our whole goal was to just see what would happen if we took a skills-based approach to recruiting. Talk about learnings. From the first iteration of building NextGen Skills, we spent 9-10 months in development before we put a product out into the world. And I'm mad at myself. I yell at younger Dylan for doing that.
Yeah.
With the job for me with this new product, we said, what's the fastest thing we can get out there just to get feedback from the market?
Yeah.
And we spent probably 3 weeks on Bubble, which is a low code platform. And I could get in the code, right? I could actually build there. And shout out to Malachi, Franzi, and our team. They were instrumental. And we put it out there. And of course, it broke after the first few hundred users.
Naturally.
We had to do it again, but we were learning from the market.
Yeah.
And we actually had users to help us decide what was next, not just our ideas, which were pretty good, but it's hard to ideate in a nutshell.
Totally.
And so when we put that out there, we tested the waters with the NextGen audience first, started tweeting a bit, got picked up by some influencers, newsletters, social media posts featured us.
Yeah.
And truly organically, one thing led to the next, and 100,000 people started using the product, which is pretty crazy
incredible.
to say.
I was so curious about that because I do feel like distribution, it's so funny. I was just having a conversation about this yesterday, but I feel so lucky. Our generation is so lucky because the internet has made it so much easier to get into anything, right? You don't have to know how to do something. You can just sort of figure it out through the internet and everything's kind of available to you. But the kind of key there is the distribution. So you can build a great product, but then how do you actually get it out there? And so, it's really, just that growth story that you mentioned of within a year, you had 100,000 users. That's really incredible. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And you're completely right. There are a couple of camps around product doesn't matter. Some people say distribution is the only thing that's important. Some people say product is the best. And if you have a good product, you'll find distribution.
Right.
I think like most things, the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And of course, depends on the industry, depends on what you're building. But we've seen so many creator-led businesses now.
Yeah.
That wasn't really a model. That didn't exist. And it wasn't an option until social media came around.
Yes.
You have the advent of the influencer and everything that comes with that.
Yeah.
And now with the new business, Different Labs, we're seeing the value of my partner Jonah and his innate following, right? And again, it's not crazy today. I'm sure by the time people listen to this a year later, maybe it'll have gone up even more.
Yeah.
But having distribution baked in from the beginning, look at the Kardashians, right?
Totally.
They start businesses. They have significant ownership simply for using their social channels.
Yeah.
That's distribution, right? That's the 10 years ago, calling up a million different people and going to the phone book, right? I can't even imagine that. That was before our time, of course. But, what a crazy world it must have been to find product market fit before you had the internet. I can't even think about that.
Yeah, it's wild. So I do want to actually get into that too, in terms of like, it would be interesting to get your perspective having built businesses and now you're sort of on your third foray into like entrepreneurship, just kind of things that you've learned and things that you're implementing. I think specifically before we get into that though, one thing I'm always curious about is like building a team, finding the right co-founder. I think people that are listening to this also, this is a question that comes up. What, I think with your first couple of businesses, I guess first and foremost, was this a classmate of yours, or how did you kind of meet your first co-founder? And do you have any sort of advice or insights or maybe stories around building a team, trials, tribulations, or things that people can take away?
All the above, for sure.
Great.
So I met Justin, my co-founder, in the first few businesses while in high school. He was a high school friend of one of my best sleepaway camp friends.
Okay.
And I was visiting him and he made the introduction at a house party at 18 years old, I think 17 actually.
Amazing.
We hit it off and we were building together for the next about 8-9 years, which is really special. I think the most important advice, because I get this question a lot, is around getting to know somebody in a work capacity before you actually start the business. I think it's easier said than done, but finding a project or like a mini MVP, if you will, of that business before you go and start the entity on, Stripe Atlas or whatever it is, and before you call the lawyers and get the shareholder agreements in place, just work on something together. So many friends work on businesses and it's great, it can be, but I don't think a friendship is a one-to-one equal with a working environment. And you also have to understand that businesses fail. Like the vast majority will fail. Can your friendship sustain that? Do you want to put your friendship through that? And there's so many platforms out there today. I think Y Combinator's co-founder matching is a popular one, at least here in New York in the tech scene. But it's tough to know through messaging with somebody if this is the partner. There's all these analogies like the airport test. Would you want to have your flight delayed and be stuck at the airport bar or health counter with somebody for 10 hours? And if the answer is no, or you're not even sure, you're going to want to build a business with that person.
Right.
Because it's not easy. It is super hard. It is long nights. It's early mornings. It's frustrating conversation after frustrating conversation. You're going to want to murder each other at many different points. But if you respect that person and if you feel like they are adding value, I think that's where you can avoid some of the resentment that can come into play with co-founder relationships. But each business is unique, right? And I think what we learned when we started NextGen Summit, the event business, different skill set, different needs from co-founders than NextGen Skills, the tech business, and certainly the case now in the health space. So knowing your business, knowing where swim lanes can sit. If you have the classic fit of technical and business co-founder, hallelujah, that's going to allow each of you to be great in your own ways. When you're both similar on paper, I think you should really have a conversation about, are we adding unique value to this business? Is this the complementary co-founder that will help all of us achieve our goals? And look, the answer might be, I don't know. That's cool. Try whatever you can to figure that out before you get into the long term, because it's a lifelong relationship, whether you like it or not, or at least until the business fails. And sometimes even beyond, right? I'm sure there are stories that we can uncover around the true longevity. Talk about that around business partnerships.
We'll get into that. Okay, that's really, really interesting. And I want to get into also, you wrote a book and I love the title of the book and the subtitle of the book. I want to talk a little bit about that too, and just sort of what inspired you to do that. What sort of was like the main message that you wanted to get out there, and a little bit about that journey as well.
It was a ton of fun. Shout out to COVID for giving us the opportunity to write that. It's what you do when you're stuck inside and you got, 12 months, you can't host events, you're figuring out what the heck is our business? Are we going to survive this? So you write a book, right? That's like the obvious one. It was a lot of fun though. And we learned a lot from other folks who had done similar style books before, Tim Ferriss being one of them. One of the first entrepreneurial books I read was The 4-Hour Workweek. And then later on, Tribe of Mentors and Tools of Titans that Tim Ferriss has published. And what I love the most is that they were all interviews with people I'd want to meet. And so sadly, you're not going to get a chance to sit down face to face with Brooke every day, right? But if we can get those people into 10 pages or something in somewhat concise manner, you can scale those conversations. I think podcasts as a whole do that, which is amazing. But that was the goal. Who do we want to learn from? Mark Cuban sounds like a great guy to learn from. Let's get him in the book, right? Met Mark, had a great conversation with Mark. and then distill that in a way that anybody else can learn from it. But the core value we really wanted to drive home was that everybody can think like an entrepreneur. Starting a business might not be for everybody. I actually don't think it is.
Yeah.
I think there's too much in the form of pushing people to start a company. And by the way, that's different than side hustles and passion projects. I'm a huge proponent of that for everybody.
For everyone. Yeah.
I don't think everybody should be a startup founder.
Right.
I do think everybody should learn how to think like one because that's going to help you with everything in life. Again, we talked about it with NextGen Skills.
Yeah.
It's the same. Entrepreneurial mindset is soft skills. It's like literally one-to-one. Just change some wording, right? You're not communicating to investors. You're communicating to your boss. You're not putting out team conflict for your company. You're navigating, how do I have a hard conversation with my colleague at the office? And so that's where we wanted to just flip the script almost and be like, yeah, entrepreneurship, it's more than just starting a business. It's how you approach life. And I think we were able to, through 50 different stories of, again, Mark Cuban, but all the way to teachers and firefighters and doctors and scientists, every walk of life, we really tried to have the most unique set of characters. We had politicians, we had priests and rabbis. It was like most amazing collection of people. You can imagine the interviews were quite diverse and asking, Mark Cuban versus a rabbi, how do you think like an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
But it's also really nice to see the synergies because they might have used different verbiage, but they're talking about the same thing in different walks of life.
What would you say if you had to distill it? Like, what does it mean to think like an entrepreneur?
It starts with seeing opportunity and then taking ownership of actualizing whatever change is necessary. I think like Carly Kloss, good example of someone in the book, supermodel, entrepreneur in her own right, started multiple businesses and brands. That tenacity, that resilience that she brought to what I imagine was a very daunting career being a supermodel is the same skill set applied in a different direction for launching that new company. But the ownership mentality is something that I think is core to everybody. As entrepreneurs, like if I don't solve the problem at my company, we're screwed. Like we're out of business, right? And if you can take that approach at your day job or in life, in your relationships, and not just pass it along to somebody or ignore it and hope that it goes away, I don't think that's going to be successful in any walk of life, right?
Yeah.
So that ownership mentality is probably the biggest one. And I think it's also just the grit that comes into it. And grit is, shout out to Angela Duckworth, amazing book. But it's a all-encompassing term that goes far beyond just business challenges, right?
Yeah.
Grit and perseverance as an individual. And when life hits you with a left hook, you're going to get up. Like that's a really hard question that a lot of people can't handle. I think entrepreneurs can, especially those who think like them.
I really want to, you just sparked something in my head. I really want to talk about the intersection of like fitness and this entrepreneurial mindset, because it's so interesting that you say that, because this is one thing that I've thought about is I think that exercise, strength training, pushing your body a bit, right, to like points of discomfort, like it is very transferable in terms of like your ability to then do hard things in your personal life. And I wonder if that relates to you at all. And then I do want to talk a little bit about how you got into sort of the different labs and sort of your journey into like really getting into health and longevity full time. So maybe we could talk about that.
Yeah, 100% short answer. It is one-to-one, especially for me. I think the way, not to use the slightly over shared quote around how you practice, how you play, but how I train is directly correlated with how I'm going to be in my meetings that day, right? If I don't have a good workout or if I skip and talk about things like non-negotiables, that approach to measuring what matters first and foremost, and then making the changes, putting in the work is how I want to live my life. We talk about OKRs, right? Objectives and key results in business all the time. We talk about KPIs. Who wouldn't want to apply that same logic to fitness, to health, which is the most important thing in the world, right? I don't have the opportunity to build businesses if I'm not healthy. And knock on wood, wherever it is, right? Like we can, thank you, we can, work on that and we're young so we can make changes. And, but if you're, not healthy, it's the classic adage that, the healthy man wants for many and the, sick person wants for one thing, to feel better. And when I get the flu or COVID, whatever it might be, the only thing on my mind, it's not like, can I close that deal? Is that investor going to say yes? It's, I just want to wake up tomorrow and feel good.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And so I really have taken my whole life a data-driven approach to my health because I think it's the most important. That looks like blood work. that looks like tracking my gym progress, maybe for strength training, it's weights, so reps. Now it's even more objective data around VO2 max and force plate output and the actual ability for my body to generate power. So these are the things that inspired me to explore what that pathway could look like. And ultimately now with different labs, take that to the masses and hopefully empower everybody to very easily track what matters is most.
Amazing. So I want to talk about what you guys do track and what are sort of like the most important indicators and things that you're measuring at the different labs. And maybe we could just do a little bit, at least for me, I've heard of these terms, but don't actually know what they mean. So maybe we could just go into that a little bit with the VO2 max and whatever else you guys are kind of measuring, just to get a sense of if somebody really wanted to get a picture of their holistic health fitness level, what should they be looking at?
For everybody, it's going to be unique too. And if you're listening and you've heard of these terms like Brooke and myself, maybe you've had a test, maybe you've done a version of these, but you're not really sure of the actionability. I think that's the gap we want to solve. So much data exists, right? I'm wearing an Oura ring, I have a Garmin on, you've got an Oura ring, right? Yeah. Maybe Apple Watch, some listeners, Whoop, there's a million different wearables. And one of the most frustrating things that I see a lot is when people decide how they feel based on what their wearable tells them in a way that, and listen, I don't want to throw any darts, so I'll hold my punches a little bit. But I see a lot of people tell me like, oh, I slept well last night because my Whoop told me so. Right. I'm like, well, how'd you feel when you woke up? Right. And we lose some of the intuitive ability because we just blindly trust. And I don't think it's the right data to trust. Sadly, the research around a lot of these wearables is less than perfect. And it's a great guiding light, but we can't look at these with objective 100% certainty. We're trying to close that gap a bit through objective measures around VO2 max. You can't fake a VO2 max score.
What is a VO2 max score?
VO2 max is basically a complete sum of your body's ability to utilize oxygen. And so when you're breathing, you want to, of course, get that oxygen to your muscles to continue to, in this case, run or strength train or whatever it might be. And so the higher your VO2 max, the better your body, very simply put, is able to utilize that oxygen to fuel your strength and performance and whatever it is that you're going after. Think sprinters, very fast twitch muscles, right? They are pushing and at a high rate and really pressing off the ground and extreme force output. They need to have a high ceiling on VO2 max, especially if they're going for, let's say, a 400 or an 800, where that's a bit longer than, a 10-second sprint. And VO2 max training is probably ignored or not really understood by most people, but it is truly the number one most correlated biomarker with longevity. And if we all can internalize that and just stop and say that back, and I'm sure your listeners are familiar with this, but the higher your VO2 max, the longer you will live, period. The lower your VO2 max, the shorter you will live. And again, of course, there are a million factors, right? You can have the highest VO2 max, get hit by a bus because you didn't cross the street and look both ways. Right. Yeah, hopefully you're looking both ways and doing what you got to do there. But everything else equal, VO2 max is directly correlated with longevity. And if we knew that, wouldn't we all want to, number one, understand our VO2 max, and then two, improve it, right? Like it's so simple and obvious, but it's something that there's a true education gap around. I played sports my whole life and I never once knew VO2 max. No one ever told me that. And granted, there was some training that I was getting to improve my VO2 max just subconsciously and like as a second order effect of what we were doing with the sport, basketball, football, whatever it was. But there was no intention behind it to help our bodies ceiling effectively on how well we can utilize oxygen. And so that's a major piece. And I know we're going deep on that one, but I think VO2 max is kind of the spear and maybe what you might have heard on Peter Tia or Andrew Huberman or in a podcast like this. Yeah. For a lot of people, that's a good biomarker to start with. Okay. From there, we can actually use your data to put together a plan. And if you are in, let's say, the lower quartile of VO2 max, I forget the numbers offhand, but we can maybe link to it. If you just improve, go from bottom 25 to the mid 25, in the orders of magnitude, you are increasing your likelihood to live another decade. Wow. And it's crazy how easy these gains can be made, but it's hard work to do the thing, right? It's 30 minutes of intense exercise every week. It's not the easiest thing.
So it's cardio, like cardio exercise that'll
for the most part. Yeah. Our favorite protocol that we tend to recommend is a 4x4x4, which is 4 minutes at close to your all-out pace. And for, let's say, running, that could be where not quite sprinting because you can't sprint for 4 minutes, but the fastest you can run for 4 minutes, you should be gassed by the end of it. You can do this on a bike, you can do this on a rower, really anything, but you want to be truly exhausted. Like you can't go anymore by 3:30 or by the end of the 4 minutes. then it's 4 minutes off. So equal 1-to-1 running and resting or whatever activity. And then do that 4 times. So that's, call it 8 minutes around times 4. That's 32 minutes all in. Do that once a week. I guarantee you come back in 3 months, your VO2 max will be higher.
Wow.
Guarantee it. Like that is the most basic. And if you're 90 VO2 max, which is extremely high, the highest ever is about 95. You might not see the same gains.
Right.
But if you're an average person walking in the streets, you're going to benefit from that.
Yeah.
And I think that's where like demystifying how these things are achievable is part of our goal. We work with some really incredible athletes. We are, partnered with Nike and helping Nike and their runners to have objective data to train better and to improve their fitness levels. But we also work with I'll say average Joes, but I consider myself an average Joe, right? I'm not winning an Olympic trial anytime soon.
Right.
But I want to be my best. I want to be my healthiest self. I think about health span and lifespan. And that's where the applicability is so crucial. There are probably about 15 different tests, and I know we went deep on one of them. But finding for Brooke what matters most, right? If Brooke's a runner, we're going to have a certain subsect of metrics that matter most to her. If Dylan is just trying to, live long and one day, a long time from now, lift his grandkids up, great. Like, here's how we can plan for that and what you should be caring about today at 28. When you're 78, like this doesn't happen to you, or you're already ahead of the game. And my parents, who are definitely not 28 anymore, they have really transformed their own fitness journey by feeling the effects of what can be, or what maybe won't be if they get in the gym or if they don't get in the gym.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful for me to see that 70-year-olds, 20-year-olds, everyone in between, elite athletes, average Joes, we can all benefit. And that's the beauty of, what I think we're building here.
And I would love to dig into, so with the different labs, like what are the kind of services that you guys are offering right now? How do people work with you? Is it largely testing and then sort of protocols? Do you dabble at all in like any recovery modalities or any of these other things? I'd just love to open up the floor on kind of what you guys are doing right now.
Building in real time. So when this launches to when hopefully people follow up and can check us out, I'd like to say we've already added new feature sets.
Cool.
But we're starting with that real testing experience. The goal being, let us add a baseline set of metrics that matter for each person. So you can come to our lab in New York. We also are partnering with gyms to make this available through the gym. So the goal being that you go to work out at your local, whatever that might be, strength club, and you can actually partner with a trainer to have the testing experience. And if you have a PT, you have a physical therapist, whoever it might be, arm them with data to do their work better, right? Giving them what matters.
Right.
So for us, it's a few areas. We talked about the metabolic health. That's your VO2 max. That's your thresholds. So if you're a runner, we get asked all the time, like, hey, should I be running in zone 2 versus zone 5? A lot of people have no idea what that means or what their zones are. We can actually measure that and tell you, based on working with our metabolic card and the different testing that we do, what your zones are, what your training zones are, to put together a plan for your marathon or for your weekend run, whatever it might be. Your resting metabolic rate, RMR, is the total caloric expenditure. So how many calories you burn on a daily basis. How many of us have ever had like a diet goal, right? Where you're trying to gain weight or lose weight, and you're guessing. I think I'm burning 2,400 calories. My Garmin says I burn 3,000. My Aura says I burn 3,400. Like, what do I have to eat to lose weight or gain weight? We can give you objective data around that. And then there's the whole strength mobility side. So this journey actually began for me when I was working with my now partner, Jonah Rosner, as my coach. And we did force plate testing, where basically you jump on 2 plates. Now, those plates are taking in thousands of data points every second. It's crazy. But we learned that my right leg was about 28% weaker than my left. And again, at 26, 27, that's not a huge issue. Like, you'll be okay, you'll get through. But if you continue to put more pressure, in this case on my left, and the right's a little bit weaker, that compounds. And when you're 66, that's a hip replacement, right? That's a break to come. And so we work together to take a data-driven approach to rectify that. Single leg training in my case, right? No more 2-legged squats, all single leg movements, and tested again later, 6 months later, down to I think 15%.
Wow. And
a year later, sub 10 difference between the 2 legs. So, 2 orders of magnitude, basically 60%, whatever that is. And for me, that opened my eyes to the power And that's just the beginning to scratch the surface.
Yeah.
Recovery, I think, is extremely important. So we partner with a lot of other groups in New York that are doing that really well.
Awesome.
I'm a huge proponent of sauna. I love it personally. It just feels really good.
Yeah.
The research also will back that up. Little bias or I guess debate around the healthy user bias that exists in sauna. Who knows? Maybe we'll do a randomized control trial at some point and get that data. I love a cold plunge. I love the community experience that comes with that at places like Alani, Othership. There's so many in New York, which is really great to have as our backyard.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of also the hyper ice, the different recovery tools that exist. We know that based on Jonah's experience in the NFL and as a professional coach of athletes, there are people who do that great. We'll partner with them. Right. We want to be one solution, one part of your holistic health plan that can just give you what you need to take it to the next level.
Yeah. Going back to, I'm so glad that you shared the story that you did this sort of like plate testing and this thing came up. That was random in the sense that you weren't having any pain or any symptoms that would have brought you in for some kind of like PT.
No, I thought I was 100% healthy.
Yeah.
I was excited to see how much of a badass I was.
Right. You were like, oh yeah.
Man, like I'm going to crush this test. And then I had I won't say rude awakening because it was a powerful learning.
Yeah.
I had about a year before that broken my fibula in that right leg. But I thought long ago I'd healed.
Yeah.
Like I was completely past the recovery.
Right.
And I thought I was fine. And clearly I wasn't. So having some cadence, and I don't think you should be jumping on force plates every day. I don't think that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
There are NFL athletes and NBA players who use force plates every single day in their training just to measure squatting consistency, right? So that we make sure their output is the same across each gym session.
Yeah.
That's not going to be for the general population what they need.
Right.
But 3 months, you can really see differences.
Yeah.
And especially if you're recovering, right? There are protocols around ACL recovery, MCL, whatever it might be. We work with physical therapists all the time to help their clients and their patients gain data that is instrumental. The eye and a trained eye is amazing, and it's incredible what PTs and trainers and coaches can see. It's even more incredible what they can do when they're armed with data. I think it's like the classic human plus technology, right? We're not trying to replace these folks. We need them. They're going to be the ones doing the delivery and the coaching and guiding somebody through.
Right.
But if we can be part of the solution to give them the data they need to do their best job, I think that's a win for everybody.
Yeah. And I think it's just like, it's very exciting to me what you're building and sort of people in this space, because one of the things that I've noticed, and it's across the board, it's not only with like kind of physical fitness, but honestly, everything. I feel like there's a lack of preventative mentality in any kind of medicine. And I think this is like pretty global. Like I live in Dubai, I've experienced that. Obviously here you experience it. And I think it's so empowering when you know what to look for. And this was a perfect example that you shared, because you wouldn't have had any reason. It's like you're not in pain yet. So you wouldn't know. But by the time that the symptoms show up, it's like you could have been doing all of this preparatory work for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, to kind of get your body in the right space. So I just think that's a great example. And I'm excited that people are kind of like waking up to, okay, hey, even if you look, feel totally healthy, there's just, our bodies are so complex, and it's so good to just have as much data as possible so you can do something about it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, the analogy that Peter Attia talks about a lot is that medicine 2.0 versus medicine 3.0, and 2.0 being reactive care.
Yeah.
And so we treat when there's a symptom. We treat when somebody comes in and they're not feeling great, and sadly, by that time, it might be too late.
Right.
If you think about the example of Prenuvo scans and full body MRIs, for those not familiar, a few different companies now doing that, but it's expensive. It's not at the point where it's mass market affordable, I'd say. But having that preventative scan can be life-changing, can be truly a matter of life and death if you catch something early. And before it was giving you that headache, right? You identify, and goodness forbid that no one has to deal with that. But I think about, that's the extreme example. What we can do is help you every day as well. When you're 70 and you have a low VO2 max, it's a lot harder to build it up, right?
Yeah.
When you're 28 and you have a low VO2 max, let's get you in the gym. Let's put the work in now.
Right.
Because that's something that, again, will over time continue to drop, just like muscle mass, just like bone density.
Right.
And so you need to build those things up when you can, to just delay and push back that inevitable decline.
Yeah.
Right? And all across the board.
Right.
And so I want to be not, living to 120 in a wheelchair, but I'd love to, have my, let's say 90s be what our grandparents experienced in, like 20, 30 years earlier, right? I want to be healthy for a much longer time.
Right.
I don't think anybody wants longevity for, to sit in a chair and not be able to use their body. That's not what we mean by, extending lifespan. We mean healthy years, at least I do.
Right.
And that's my goal, right? And we see the Brian Johnsons of the world who I've actually had the chance to meet and speak with. And I don't think that what Blueprint does is for everybody, but I think what he is doing pushes everybody and inspires everybody. And he'll do his thing. He'll measure a bajillion metrics and do crazy therapies and go to Prospera off the coast of, I think, Honduras and, get follistatin gene therapies. And again, that's like for him.
Next level.
Yeah, it's next level. But if he does enough of that, and maybe a few other folks do things of that nature, we will find the mass market appeal, right? And sadly, it'll take too long because of the way our insurance works, and this preventative stuff is not covered by anything in healthcare.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'd love if I could wave a magic wand. I would.
The next problem.
Yeah, I try to see what we can do there. A lot of policy and whatnot in there, but we can get into that.
Yeah.
I want to live in that world where we can think proactively, right? And where we can all try to optimize.
Yeah.
And optimization doesn't mean that we're all walking around like six packs and huge biceps like that. That's not what it means.
Yeah.
For some people, that's what you want. That's great.
Yeah.
Others, it's just like getting out of bed and feeling good.
Totally.
And like lifting your kid, right?
Yeah.
Your dog, whatever it is,
Functional.
right?
Yeah.
Functional health. And I'm a huge proponent. Yeah, I take a few more supplements than the average person, but I'm not trying to be so calibrated to the point where I'm not living life.
Right.
I do have a drink every now and then. I do want to experience. For me, my ideal life is broader than just going to the gym and coming home and sleeping 12 hours a day. Like, don't get me wrong, very important. I wish I could.
Yeah.
But again, like I think this whole movement that the blueprints of the world, like Brian, Peter Tia, and Medicine 3.0, they're all saying the same thing in different words.
Yeah. And
that's what's exciting. It's almost like a awakening, an enlightenment, right? And if we can be part of that by helping somebody like Dylan, who has a 30% imbalance or great shape, a low VO2 max, or never had blood work and discovers that, their cholesterol or HDL and LDL numbers, whatever it might be, are out of whack, we can do something about it. And it's never too late. That's another message that I really want to drive home. My parents, in their later part of life, started working out. Like that's an amazing change. They will see benefits. It'll be harder. It'll be a lot more motivation in the beginning to get started. Yeah. Just the way that our bodies work. But I'm so proud of them. They can feel the impact of, 45 minutes in the gym and an hour walk, right?
Yeah, totally.
And it's never too late.
Yeah, that's so funny. My parents are doing yoga twice a day now. And
twice a day?
They're like they're like so into it.
My parents,
like,
they're going to be, now they got a little competitive element
maybe,
there.
I think that's so great, like with flexibility and strength, and
amazing.
They're like all into the sauna and everything. And it's also something that I don't think either of them really paid attention to until like they were in their 60s. And now it's great. And I think it's already impacting definitely like their quality of life for sure. So I completely agree with you.
The easiest way to be inspired to start a fitness journey is when you feel the lack of fitness, right? Lack of health. And I think what we're talking about is just helping people get to that point without the negative impacts, right?
Yeah.
If you can be inspired and have that catalyst moment, in many a way, I joke with my parents all the time, like they had been playing around with the gym and, doing their thing every now and then. When I was over, they would work out with me and then kind of ignore it for a bit. And then my sister's wedding came about and they're like, well, I want to look good in that dress. I want to feel good at the wedding. And again, whatever it takes, that's fine.
Yeah.
As long as you do the thing, you do the work. And now the wedding is come and gone and they still work out 4 or 5 days a week because
amazing.
They love it, right? And it took something.
Becomes addicting.
Hopefully for anybody else out there, like I'm sure your listeners are on the healthier side. They are into this world. They're in the gym.
Yeah.
We all know people who we love and respect who maybe don't have that. I think if we can just be a good example or motivator in a sense, that's how change slowly over time will take place.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit because you mentioned earlier with sort of like the Oura Ring and other wearables that you sort of lament the fact that some people kind of take that as a cue and they've sort of lost touch with their intuitive feeling about how they feel. How do you feel like you kind of balance these things between sort of data and kind of measurement and like having sort of that, but then also keeping in tune with your own body and listening to that sort of like inner wisdom that you have within you?
it's an amazing question because obviously, like, here I am rocking a couple of things. So I care about the wearable data, and obviously I care about the data that we are providing with different labs. But I think it's one part of the solution. We should not ignore how we feel. And even if I woke up today and my Oura Ring said I had 100% readiness score, but I felt crappy, I didn't feel my best, I wouldn't go for a PR. Like, I wouldn't try to, but my ring says I got to push it. I think that's where it gets dangerous, and vice versa, right? If you feel great, but your ring says not so amazing stats, should you then like hold back? Probably not. Like, if you feel great, you can go for it.
Right.
I've heard from many a friend that their PRs at the gym happen when they're like slightly hungover, which is a hilarious reality. But I think it's when you give yourself a break, right? And you don't have the expectation. That's my, at least, hypothesis in this case. Shout out to a friend, Teddy, who's a health investor and operator, who was the one we talked about this with. And we all put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect all the time, especially when it comes to performing in the gym, that whether it's, the Oura Ring giving us permission because we didn't have the greatest score, we care a little bit less. There's less expectations on ourselves. But to your point about intuitive thinking, I believe that it can be your day-to-day guide, but it's not going to find some of the underlying like blood work or visceral fat.
Yeah,
so we believe in DEXA scans. So that's a huge part of our experience. In-body measurements and scales, they're directionally helpful, but they're not going to give you the information you might need on muscle mass and visceral fat around your organs. That's like a silent killer, right? You can't look in the mirror and say whether you're visceral fat or not. Like, some of the skinniest people and most in shape folks, like, their bodies just hold fat differently.
Really?
It's pretty incredible. Now, obviously, as a whole, like, if you look at someone who maybe is obese versus someone who's not, like, there's a correlation between that and the visceral fat.
Right.
But bodies hold fat differently.
What is visceral fat?
It's simply put the fat around your organs.
Okay.
So it sits around in the core, your inner core though, which again is not what you're going to see in the mirror. And DEXA scans are pretty much the only way we can measure visceral fat, something that you really want to keep low. And there are ways and strategies, some of them therapeutics, to actually combat this. But it's a lot of the saturated fats in your diets and whether you're eating or not eating healthy fats. And again, like, a lot of the bodybuilding community, I think, is focused on muscle mass as the only metric that matters. But how about bone density, right? How about these underlying elements that, again, at 28 and 30 and 40 even, you're probably not going to have to worry about unless something goes wrong, right? When you're older and you start to worry about these things because you're feeling the effects, it's not too late. It's never too late, as we said, but it's much harder to start. And if you could just give yourself the best advantage, why not, right? Especially if it's also somewhat enjoyable. You don't have to suffer in the weight room if, like, you hate it, right? There are ways that you can do similar activities. And I do believe in strength training for everybody. I believe in, like, heavy resistance training at some way, shape, or form in everybody's program. You don't have to do it 6 days a week if you don't love it, right? Like, there is a minimum viable amount that is much lower than that, right? And everybody's going to be unique as well in that. But finding your program, I think, is the most important.
Yeah, very true. Very, very true. Yeah, I'm so with you on strength training, which is so funny because I used to be like the cardio queen, like running, only. But I mean, to your point, and it's a very similar story, I basically like wore out all the cartilage in my knees, didn't properly train for a 50K, ran that, destroyed my knee, obviously, because that was so stupid. Went to the PT and the PT was like, you cannot do any distance running anymore. And at the time, it was like life shattering. Like, I did not know how to work out if it wasn't running. And now I look back and I'm like, thank God that happened because it forced me to find other ways to exercise. And now I'm like, don't get me wrong, I can enjoy a run. Like, I'll go out for like a couple miles sometimes, but I so much more prefer like strength training, Pilates, more functional movements. There's just there's so many beautiful ways to move your body. And I so agree with you that it's just all about finding the way that feels really great to you that's going to keep you coming back. And it just does become addicting when you find the right movement. So
I'm sorry you defined it that way through the negative side. But again, like, that was your catalyst to explore your holistic health routine. Your parents doing yoga twice a day. I'm sure they mix in some strength if they're parents, right? They're going to follow her advice.
Exactly.
But I think a lot about, like, let's get you in the force plates. I'd love to see what your force output, how well your body handles absorbing that force when you land. Your body's ability to recycle energy. Hell yeah. Like, something that we don't really appreciate. If you're a runner, you're just doing micro jumps. Like, every step is a micro jump. Right? You're not like exploding to dunk a basketball.
Right.
But you are pushing force into the ground and exploding off of, and then landing. And so we can really look at your body's ability to, number one, do the off the ground, the explosion, where you're creating force, you're creating power, you're using both limbs in perhaps equal, or like my case, less than equal ways. And then how well you can absorb that force when you land and then recycle it into your next jump. Like all these metrics. What I'd love to say is that we met Brooke a year before she burns out or destroys her knees.
Yeah.
And we could start to look at some of these metrics and plan, whether it's recovery or diversity in your training.
Yeah.
Again, sometimes you have to experience it, you have to live it just to, see the power. But these are the types of insights that some regular cadence of baseline plus follow-up testing can just be a guide.
Yeah.
Right? We're not going to replace the work that you put in. You're the one who has to get up and go for the run, go to the gym, do the yoga session, mobility training, whatever it is. We can just help you sharpen that axe a bit. I think that's exciting.
Yeah, totally agree. I want to be mindful of time. I usually cycle us through kind of like a lightning round, and there are a couple of key questions that I love to get from all of our guests that I think will be interesting to run through. The first question is, what is one non-negotiable part of your wellness routine? This can be fitness or something else.
Had we met 2 years ago or even a year ago, I would have said strength training for sure. And it's still, my 1B answer. But in the last few years, it's probably become sleep. Sleep is so important. And I think a lot about the multitude of impacts that lack of sleep has. But I'm someone who, for the first 20 something years of my life, didn't really prioritize sleep. And you can get away with that. And I probably still could now. But these days, I'm really committed to getting, at the very minimum, 8.5 hours in the bed, because for me, that leads to 7.5 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
I'm not the best sleeper. I know that. I'm a very light sleeper. And that's where the Oura Ring, even if it's just a reminder to prioritize sleep, it can be helpful for me. But that leads to sacrifice. That means I'm maybe not staying out as late and having a couple of drinks with friends on a weeknight or a weekend, whatever it is.
Right.
It also means that I sometimes have to push meetings in the morning back, right? It means I'm traveling at different times. I'm not taking certain flights that are going to sacrifice sleep.
Yeah.
And that might miss out on, sneaking in that extra meeting on the West Coast trip, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But I'm making that active trade-off. And so that has become a non-negotiable. And I hope to be able to maintain that habit for the rest of my life.
I love that. The flights one is a big one for me too, because I also used to just whatever flight kind of is the best, makes the most sense. You'll just go for it. But I've gotten better at sleeping on planes, but it's,
it's not possible for me.
Yeah.
6'4" and
sorry.
it's not going to work too well.
Yeah.
I'm actually awful at sleeping on. It's funny.
Honestly, you probably couldn't even sleep in business class because the lie flat's probably not big enough for your feet.
Yeah, it's going to be hit or miss on most all. But one day we'll get into the first class.
You'll be in your own
extended,
suite, in your own bed.
that we can talk about.
We're romanticizing that.
I remember looking most recently on a flight to Europe. And shout out to the Oura Ring. It told me I got 26 minutes of sleep.
Oh, shoot.
An 8-hour flight. And
oh, gosh.
Again, I felt it. So I didn't need the ring to tell me. I felt miserable and I needed 7 coffees the next morning.
Yeah.
But that's not a good trade-off for me.
Yeah.
No. And that's going to make me feel not so great that day, but probably not the next day either.
Yeah.
And then you have to account for jet lag. So a million factors. But sleep is so important. Dementia, Alzheimer's, every which way. Training the next day, you name the thing, and sleep is, Matt Walker is a great resource for those who are interested. I love reading about his stuff and listening. And again, we can go deeper, but get your sleep.
Yeah, I love that. And what would be one piece, if you could only give one piece of advice to an aspiring entrepreneur, what would it be?
It would probably be to just get started. I think entrepreneurs who have a vision, have an idea, whether again for a side hustle, a project, a company, we oftentimes get in our own way by spending the weeks or months leading up just planning, and we can fool ourselves into thinking it's productive. Of course, extra time strategizing and having conversations before you do the thing, that's going to be helpful. I'm not arguing with that. But at a certain point, going back to the job for me learning, just get started, just do the thing.
Yeah.
Don't try to boil the ocean, right? Find the MVP. What's the minimum viable product that you can launch that would give you feedback? I think as entrepreneurs, we oftentimes lose sight around the purpose of startups, which is to take an educated guess. Go back to your science days, right? 8th grade biology. You have a hypothesis. Your goal of an experiment is just to prove whether it was right or wrong. not to be attached to that being the solution, right? We just want to learn. And there's so many ways to do that without starting a company, raising money, doing the whole thing that you read about online. Just get started. Like, I'm sure with your podcast, you've been thinking about it for a while. And then you, at a certain point, were like, I just got to have an interview, right? Like we could work on the brand and the guest list and the topics, a million different ways we can have it all figured out. But like, you're going to learn more just doing the thing and probably screwing it up and doing it a little bit better next time.
For sure. Actually, the best piece of advice that I got from a friend when I was like, had this idea, it was still like idea phase. And a friend of mine gave me the advice. He said, just build in public and make that like almost like the MVP of the product kind of. And you start building your audience just by putting yourself out there, and you have that extra like accountability. But more importantly, it's that forcing mechanism of like, you just get the ball rolling.
Totally.
And I think that's so powerful. I so agree with you. It's so much better to get like a mediocre product out, but it's out that you iterate, than to spend a year perfecting the brand and the colors. It's like all of that will come later. But I think starting is often the hardest part. And it's where we trip ourselves up. We get ourselves in such a mental loop of like, there's so much fear. And I'm so glad you used the word attachment too, because I think detachment, and this just like extends so far beyond just entrepreneurship, but just like spirituality and how you go about your life in general. But I think not attaching to outcomes is just such an important part of life. And I think especially as an entrepreneur, I love that you said that, because it's so true, right? Like you have a problem set. Most successful companies go through at least one pivot. So I think just, not attaching yourself to the fact that your first hypothesis had to be the right one is such a powerful insight.
And I'm sharing this with your audience, but I'm also reminding myself.
Yeah.
Not 10 times out of 10, I forget that, I didn't have to be right. I just wanted to get to yes or no.
Yeah.
And knowing first and foremost how to understand what a yes or no means and what signals, like that's really important. And then just doing the thing.
Right.
Our ego gets in the way, right? We want to be perfect. At least for me, I have still dealing with this huge fear of failure. And if I can get better at being comfortable with screwing things up, that's going to help my companies and help my relationships, myself. I'll feel better.
Yes.
That's where, as I said, we stand in our own way oftentimes. If we can just be a little bit more okay. And what I've really learned is that no one cares.
Literally.
Like, your parents and your family and maybe a few close friends, they genuinely care, and your failure is their failure and they feel it. But the world doesn't. Like we are, I say this lovingly, so insignificant.
Yeah.
But we can do something about that, right? And that should be freeing. Now, again, it's hard to actualize that, but truly we're on our own race. I know we're athletes, we're runners. Like you want to compete, but ideally you'd like to compete against yourself, right? And use the others as motivation.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like I'm doing Dylan, and last I checked, I'm the first to do Dylan, at least the way that I'm doing it. And so who am I competing against? Like it's up to me to define that.
Yeah.
And there's some positives that come through groups and Forbes 30 under 30, like it's nice, and those things are really rewarding. Yeah. End of the day, though, they only matter as much as I give them credit.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I think for me, one of the most helpful also just like reframes or insights that I had from speaking with people is like just viewing life as a massive experiment. Yeah. And love that. In that sense, like what is failure even? It's just redirection. It's like, okay, like cool, we learned a thing from this thing. Now we're moving on to the next thing, and you're kind of constantly like up leveling yourself in whatever, whether it's whatever part of your life that it kind of pertains to. But I love that. Thank you, Dylan. So I guess to wrap up, I'd love to just share with people. I hijacked your lightning round. I apologize. This was a perfect lightning round. I loved it. This is great. But where can people find you? Where can people find the different lab? Who should be coming in? Yeah. Just give us sort of the wrap up. If anybody, any topic resonated with folks out there, would love to stay in touch. Probably LinkedIn is my number one social media, which is actually funny these days. Great. But I'm just Dylan Gambardella on LinkedIn. Twitter shortened my name, so I'm Dill Gambardella on Twitter. Instagram, all that jazz. Feel free to reach out. And then at The Different Lab on Instagram is where you can see a lot of our content. Our website, which is currently Different Health, will soon be in that new sphere, but we'll get all that stuff. We'll get all that in. Would love to meet anybody who really thinks about optimization and has thought of VO2 max testing, has been a runner or an athlete or just want to get started in their journey.
Let's have a chat. Let's figure out what your goals are, how we can best help you. Certainly, if any gym owners or folks in that space want to bring this to your facility and arm your members with objective data, call me. Let's do it. But yeah, that's it's a lot of fun. And if anybody's in New York, let's get together. Let's get a workout in. It's my favorite way to have meetings these days. Just doing it over a workout, which is
Amazing.
the best for all of us. So yeah, thanks for having me, Brooke.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Tons of fun.